The Comfort Women System, Japan's systemic exploitation during World War II. When discussing the tragedies of World War II in the Pacific, certain events, like the Nanjing Massacre or the Bataan Death March, often come to mind. Yet another widespread atrocity perpetrated by the Imperial Japanese military was the establishment of so-called comfort stations. This euphemism referred to state-sanctioned brothels where thousands of women, primarily from Korea, China, the Philippines, and other occupied regions, were coerced or deceived into sexual servitude for Japanese troops. Labeled comfort women by military bureaucracy, their plight remained veiled for decades after the war. Only in the late 20th century did survivors begin stepping forward to recount the horrors they endured, igniting international disputes about historical responsibility, reparations, and apology. To this day, the comfort women issue remains one of the most politically and emotionally charged legacies of Japan's wartime actions. The system's origins trace back to the early 1930s, when Japanese commanders noticed rampant sexual violence among troops, particularly as they moved through Manchuria and China. Higher-ups argued that establishing regulated brothels would reduce uncontrolled assaults on local populations and keep soldiers from contracting venereal diseases. Recruiting such comfort women often involved trickery. Women were promised factory jobs or restaurant positions in distant cities, only to find themselves trapped in military-controlled brothels upon arrival. Others were forcibly seized during sweeps in occupied territories. Brothel managers operated under military oversight, distributing ration cards, monitoring medical checks, and ensuring the women's compliance through intimidation or violence. While official regulations spoke of voluntary contracts, mountains of evidence, from diaries, testimonies, and post-war investigations, reveal a systematic, state-sponsored mechanism of sexual slavery. In Korea, then a colony of Japan, young women from impoverished families proved especially vulnerable to recruitment scams run by brokers collaborating with the Japanese army. Parents might sell a daughter, believing she'd be employed in domestic service abroad, never suspecting the brutal reality. Once delivered to comfort stations, the women faced a regimen of repeated sexual exploitation, sometimes forced to service dozens of soldiers each day. Physical abuse, beatings, and torture were common. Attempts at escape could result in severe punishment or execution. Allied POWs who stumbled upon these brothels sometimes recorded glimpses of the women's dire conditions. Reports of suicides, fatal illnesses, and psychological breakdowns were widespread, yet the military bureaucracy maintained records on each facility as if it were a routine logistical component of war. The rationale behind comfort stations underscored the Imperial Army's view of colonized peoples as subjugated populations, existing primarily to serve Japan's war effort. Commanders sought to placate enlisted men, believing that morale and discipline might improve if soldiers had official outlets. But the reality was that sexual violence persisted outside these stations, and many women died from disease, unsafe abortions, or outright murder. Although an exact figure is elusive, historians estimate the total number of comfort women may have reached into the hundreds of thousands across various theaters: China, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands. As the war dragged on, the demand for fresh recruits escalated, with the Japanese government employing local collaborators to coerce or kidnap more women. With Japan's defeat in 1945, surviving comfort women were often left stranded far from home, with no compensation or recognition of their ordeal. Occupation authorities initially focused on demobilizing the army and prosecuting top-level war criminals. The comfort women system fell into the background, overshadowed by more publicly exposed atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre or the Bataan Death March. Moreover, the stigma of sexual exploitation led many survivors to remain silent, fearing shame or ostracism in conservative societies. Official Japanese documents about comfort stations were burned or hidden as the empire collapsed, and Allied forces showed little interest in delving deeply into an issue that might complicate political alliances in the emerging Cold War landscape. It wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s that the comfort women issue erupted into global discourse. A handful of survivors in South Korea courageously broke their silence, detailing the forced servitude they experienced as teenagers. Media coverage brought these shocking stories to international attention, prompting historians to unearth military records, diaries, and testimonies across Asia. Legal activists in Korea, the Philippines, Taiwan, and elsewhere filed lawsuits against the Japanese government, demanding official apologies and compensation. Japan's initial reactions varied, with some politicians denying or minimizing the system's coercive nature. Over time, partial admissions emerged. Japanese prime ministers and chief cabinet secretaries issued statements of regret or apology, yet critics lambasted him as vague or insincere. The question of state responsibility and war reparations remains entangled in legal disputes and diplomatic tensions to this day. One of the most contentious points is whether the Imperial Japanese government directly orchestrated the recruitment and management of comfort women, or whether it delegated these tasks to private contractors acting independently. Countless documents demonstrate military oversight at multiple levels. Regulations for health checks, instructions on how to procure women, and budgets for constructing or supplying comfort stations. Survivors' testimonies further expose how such institutional processes trap them in a system reminiscent of forced slavery. Yet Japanese revisionist groups argue that many women volunteered for sex work due to economic hardship, dismissing accounts of coercion. Evidence, however, strongly favors the survivors' narratives of deception, abduction, and official complicity. Meanwhile, the comfort women issue reverberates in international relations, especially between Japan and neighboring countries like South Korea. Memorial statues erected in front of Japanese embassies, depicting a seated Korean girl, spark diplomatic rifts. Korean and Chinese advocacy groups organize events demanding more comprehensive apologies and compensation. Some Japanese politicians express frustration, claiming post-war treaties settled all claims, or insisting that past apologies suffice. Others champion a fuller reckoning, recognizing that moral responsibility cannot be dismissed by legal technicalities. Amid these debates, surviving women, now elderly, provide heartbreakingly direct testimonies of rape, beatings, and abandonment, reminding the world that time alone does not heal all wounds. Cultural works, from films and plays to novels, help to humanize the comfort women's stories, amplifying calls for accountability. Scholars pass terminology. While comfort women was a euphemism, terms like sex slaves more accurately capture the forced nature of their plight. In 2015, Japan and South Korea announced a deal calling for a government-funded foundation and an irreversible resolution, yet many survivors found the agreement insufficient. Some argued no sum of money could erase decades of trauma unless accompanied by unequivocal acknowledgement of state responsibility. The subsequent political shifts in both nations cast doubt on the permanence of such a pact. Thus, the comfort women issue endures as an open sore in East Asian diplomacy, layered with national pride, historical memory, and personal suffering. Outside Asia, activists highlight the comfort women system as part of a broader conversation on wartime sexual violence, a phenomenon not unique to World War II or to Japan, but exemplifying how misogyny and militarism can merge with devastating consequences. Feminist scholars link these stories to modern conflicts where armies and militias continue to exploit civilian populations. The moral imperative is clear: confront past atrocities to better safeguard human rights in current and future wars. If one lesson emerges, it's that ignoring or downplaying institutionalized sexual exploitation only perpetuates cycles of violation, leaving survivors without justice and risking repetition of such crimes. For modern Japan, acknowledging the comfort women system remains both a moral responsibility and a diplomatic necessity. A segment of Japanese society, including students, activists, and academics, pushes for open historical examination, bilingual archival research, and educational reforms. Museums and peace organizations occasionally feature exhibits documenting the women's testimonies. However, political backlash arises whenever these efforts threaten national pride or clash with narratives favored by conservative leaders. The tension underscores how WWII's legacies shape Japan's identity, with the comfort women issue symbolizing an intersection of empire, gender, and memory. Finding a path forward hinges on honest engagement with survivors' accounts and public acceptance of historical wrongdoing. Today, only a handful of comfort women survivors are still alive, many in their 80s or 90s. As they pass away, the urgency to preserve their testimonies grows. Scholars continue to uncover records scattered in old government files, diaries, or distant archives, piecing together more of the puzzle. Each new revelation either reaffirms the horrors or provides details of how local communities experience the system. These last voices stand as a living testament to the cruelty of warfare when unchecked by empathy. Their plea is simple: listen to us, believe our ordeal, and ensure no future generation endures similar betrayal. Subscribe to Legends of the Battlefield for more stories of brilliant tactics and legendary leaders.